Hey everyone and welcome to the video. Today I'm going to show you how to mix bass guitar in Logic Pro using only stock plugins. Bass guitar is one of the foundations of a good mix, and if your bass doesn't sound right, there's a good chance your mix doesn't sound right either. So in this video I'm going to cover EQ, compression, limiting, and saturation on the bass, as well as some tools Logic has for amp and DI sounds. I'm going to switch over to screen view, so make sure you like and subscribe, and we're going to get started. In my session view here, I've got drums and a DI bass. The bass was recorded with a Hofner very thin bass on the neck pickup. It's just a very nice, warm, kind of open sounding bass, and I'll have links to the bass and all that kind of stuff down below in the description. I recorded it into an A Designs Ready DI box, so it's that big red tube DI. It's meant to sound kind of like the circuit in the old like flip top amp. Here's what it sounds like with just the drums and the bass, no processing on the bass. Here's the bass by itself. So the very first thing I like to do when working with DI bass is look around for any sort of amp sim or DI sim or anything that I could use to enhance it from the get-go. And Logic has this Bass Amp Designer plugin. So if you go down to Logic, Amps and Pedals, Bass Amp Designer, and hit Mono, it'll pull this up. So the Bass Amp Designer plugin, if you're not familiar with it, you've got basically whatever you're using really big right here. Down here at the bottom, you have buttons for an amp and a DI box. Depending on if you want an amp sound or a DI sound or a blend of the two, you've got all that right there. So it's a really nice way to kind of get dialed in quickly. Here's just the DI box by itself. This DI box is based on the Avalon U5, and the controls are really similar. You have a boost right here, which is just the overall level. So I've gone ahead and set mine to where when my fader is at unity or 0 plus or minus, then the level is right around -12. So in the rough ballpark. There's a high frequency cut button, which is going to roll off your top end. And I really like to do that on DI bass because it gets rid of that like kind of not great top end. So I'll go ahead and turn that on. Here's with it. Here's without it. Really subtle, but there's kind of this clicking on top when the note is attacked, and that gets rid of it. Over here you have a tone shaping, kind of 6-position tone shaping knob, and you can turn it on and off right below that. So if you don't want to use it at all, you really like your bass DI, just leave it off. But I'd recommend turning it on and flipping through the different settings because they all kind of do something different. So here's nothing, and then I'll turn it on and flip through all of them. So 5 and 6 feel like they start to roll off the low end, and I don't like that. 1 and 2 are really rich and full, and then 3 and 4 have a really nice mid-range presence. So depending on what you're going for, this is a great way to quickly make big bass tone moves. One of the things I think people mess up when they're first learning how to mix bass is they're like, oh, it's bass, I'm just gonna turn up the low end, turn up the bass. But if you only pay attention to the low end of your bass, you're not gonna get any of that character, any of that top end or mid-range, and that top end and mid-range is actually what helps it cut through your mix and helps your bass translate to other systems. So if you're only boosting lows, it'll sound great in your headphones because it's, you know, like low end boosted, low boost. But once you play it on your phone or like listen on some crappy headphones, you're not going to be able to hear the bass. And the reason isn't because of your low end, it's because of your mid-range. So that's all I'm going to do here. If you are into amp sounds and want to mess around with the amp sound, feel free to do so. There's basically 3 amps here. There's a modern, there's a classic, which is like an Ampeg, regular Ampeg, and then a flip top, which is like the old school Ampeg. So if you want to play around with amp tones, you've got tons of options there. I personally prefer DI tones. That's just me. Next stage is a compressor, and it's really important when you're mixing bass to control the overall level. Because even if it's the best sounding bass tone you've ever heard, but sometimes it's too loud and sometimes it's too quiet, it's gonna get lost in the mix. For this, I'm using the stock Logic compressor on the Vintage VCA mode. So this is kind of like an SSL bus compressor. It's one of my favorite sounding compressors for many applications. I have my threshold at -20, ratio at 4:1, makeup at 2, attack at 10, and release at 72. That's a starting point. Definitely tweak it to taste, and I'll show you kind of what to look for here. So I'm going to hit play, and we're going to adjust the threshold until we're reducing about 3 decibels of gain reduction. If you want more gain reduction, pull this threshold down. If you want less, pull it up closer to 0. Other than that, I prefer to keep the ratio at 4:1. If your bass player is super ultra consistent, maybe you could pull that back down to 3:1 or 2:1. Or if your bass player is really up and down with his dynamics, maybe consider something higher like 5:1 or above. Attack, I usually keep around 10 milliseconds. You can open this up if you're trying to get more punch and attack from your bass. If you're doing a really aggressive genre, I'd recommend maybe pulling this up a little bit to get more of that punch through, and I'll show you what that sounds like. Kind of get a little more stab through. I actually really like it. At this point, it's just about controlling the level of the bass and making sure we get a nice, even performance. So next, I'm going to use a channel EQ, just a regular channel EQ, and I will get rid of all these and show you what I did. This is the only time I'm going to tell you not to roll off low end. I roll off low end on every other instrument in my session except for bass. If you've watched any of my other mixing tutorials, I'm always like, roll off low end, roll off low end. That's for the bass. So all your rolling off low end practice has led you to this moment for your bass to fully occupy the low end of your mix. I do, however, add a little bit of low end, not a lot, but we definitely want to emphasize that. That is its primary area it's existing. So here's without that boost. Really subtle, it just warms it up a little bit. I'm using the low shelf at 119 hertz and about 3 decibels of boost. And just play around with this. You can see on the spectrum kind of where your notes are hitting. So if your bass is a little lower, boost a little lower, or if it's doing high stuff, boost a little higher. It just all depends on what's happening. So you can see the fundamental of my bass is right here, kind of between 50 and 80. So that's why I chose to boost where I did. If you boost a little higher up towards 200, you'll start to get some of that harmonic detail, like low mid punch, and that's also really nice to have from your bass. So anywhere from 60 to 200 is fair game for this low shelf. It really depends on the bass that was used and the type of genre and so many factors, but that's kind of what you need to look for there. Okay, so I ended up around 143 hertz with 3.5 decibels boosted. I'm gonna skip this one, I'm gonna come back to this. This next one here is a mud cut. So somewhere in the low mids, there's gotta be some mud. And this band, I'm gonna boost it, sweep around till it sounds yucky and pull it out. Just a little bit though. If you pull a lot out, you're gonna kind of get that more scooped mid bass sound, which you could also want. So I'll show you what that sounds like. It's kind of more of a modern sound, but to me, I like some of that stuff down there because it's a little more vintagey sounding, a little more organic, but whatever you're into, that's how you get it. Next is my favorite boost. This is kind of all the magic of the bass, in my opinion, is somewhere between 500 and 1K. So you might think that your bass needs to exist higher, but up here is like vocals and guitars and so many other things happening. And I've noticed in a lot of my mixes, I end up cutting drums between 500 and 1K anyway. So there's a good bit of space there. And so number one, I love how the bass sounds there. And two, there's already space carved out in your drums. So I'll boost this and kind of let you hear the magic. Next, I just cut a little bit at 6K because it got kind of finger noisy. All that stuff. Also, if your bass is interfering with your vocals, then that's going to happen somewhere between 3 and 5K. So just boost in that area, see where it's interfering, and cut it out. So this cut right here is my kick cut in an effort to keep my low end clean. And there's really only two things existing down there. It's my kick and my bass. One thing I've learned is that the bass changes frequency, like it's changing notes, it's moving all around. But the kick, like it's tuned to a frequency and that's where it stays. So I always pull the kick frequency out of the bass and that helps it to sit nice together. On my kick, I boosted around 54 Hertz. So here's without the kick boost. Here's with it. You definitely need headphones to hear that. It's like pretty sub lows, but I pulled out of the bass at the same spot. So basically to find this, you can boost your kick, figure out where your kick sounds best, and then tailor the bass around it. So, I just found that 54 Hertz frequency, and then I boosted my bass there to confirm that it would sound kind of chaotic, and it did. That's just occupying the same space. It sounds muddy and distorted, so just cut at that spot and it cleans it up. Next, I like to use Phat effects. It's under Logic, Multi-Effects, Phat effects. And Phat effects is cool because it has a bass enhancer and distortion. So not only can you warm up the low end of your track, but you can also add some kind of gritty goodness. And all three of these are the same, and you can pick different things. So I chose Scream, which is like a tube screamer. I chose Soft Saturation, and I chose Tube. So I'll add some of each one at a time, and you can hear what they're doing. That's pretty good. Since that distortion added about 6 decibels of gain, I'm going to pull it out right here at the master. So here's without that. Here's with it. It might not feel like much, but that's the detail that helps it to cut through a mix. And you might even think it sounds bad like that, but in the context of a mix, that's what it needs to sound like to cut through. So the more kind of nasally and yucky it can be, the better it's going to translate, within reason. Next is the bass enhancer. And so I'm going to flip that on. I usually like to use warm. And all you have here is a tune and an amount. So the amount is obviously how much, and the tune is where. So if I set the tune super low, it's going to be enhancing the bass at 47 Hertz. Like super subby. And this goes all the way up to 150. Turn the amount up a little bit, adjust the tune somewhere nice, and find a nice area for it. I like 92, and then I'm going to pull this amount down so it's really subtle, maybe like 10 to 20%. Here's without it. Just a little bit, like just very subtle. The final step I like to use for bass is actually a limiter, and you might think that's a little weird. After mixing so many songs and trying to balance that final bass sound with a compressor, I really like a limiter because it just locks it in there. So you can find the limiter by going to Logic, Dynamics, Limiter, and Mono. The idea of a limiter is you set an output level or a threshold or a ceiling, whatever they call it, and the audio will not exceed that level. And then you get a volume knob and you push the audio down here until it's right up to the ceiling. And that in turn just locks the audio right in place. Mode, put it on precision. True peak detection, you want that on. Look ahead is fine at 5 milliseconds. And I'm going to pull this output level all the way down to -10. Right away when you do that, it's going to get a lot quieter. So then just take this gain and push it back up until your bass is hitting a little bit of reduction. You don't want to be slamming this, but you definitely want it to be activated. I'd mess around with this release control. You want the gain reduction to kind of be gone before the next hit happens, but you also don't want it just immediately disappearing. So there's a happy medium there, usually somewhere between like 80 and 160. Here's without it. Here's with it. If you notice down here on the meter, it just locks it right in place. This is about all I do, but I do want to show you a couple more plugins you could use situationally to get some different sounds. And mostly these are going to be the color EQ, the Vintage EQ collection from Logic. So you can get there by going to Logic, EQ, Vintage EQ collection, and you've got 3 options here. One of my favorites for bass is the Vintage Graphic EQ. This is a 10-band graphic EQ. Graphic EQ meaning the bands are fixed, the frequencies are fixed, and you can just add more or less of them. So you could always run through here and listen to certain frequencies, see what you like, and boost and cut stuff. So an example of what I would do on bass is probably push some 125. Cut a bit of 250 and 500, boost 1K. Probably cut 16 and cut 8K. You can always push the output here too for a little bit more coloration. You can also use a compressor instead of the limiter in that last spot because they are interchangeable. It's whatever you can use to lock that bass in and kind of have it occupy the same volume. If your bass is really noisy, I'd recommend using a noise gate, probably higher up in the chain right before your first compressor, so between the bass amp and the compressor. And the reason for this is it will cut out all those gaps and help your bass feel tighter. So I'm going to go to noise gate. So I'll leave all this on default to start and just focus on threshold. So I'm going to pull threshold up until I start to see the gate closing when the bass isn't playing, kind of all those spaces. If it feels kind of choppy or not smooth, you can increase the release to give it kind of a better feel. You can also add some look ahead to try to smooth it out. Here's without it. So that's another thing you could do to tighten the performance of the bass, especially in like heavy genres like metal and stuff where you have those hits, you'd want a gate to kind of tighten it up. Other than that, everything else I would do on bass is situational to the mix and what else is happening. So definitely check your bass in the context of your whole mix. And if you need kind of more of that cut through, that's somewhere in the 1K range. If you need more low end, obviously that's down low. And just don't take what I said as like law. This is a guideline and I'm showing you where to find stuff, but it's important to adjust it situationally for your mix as always. So here's the whole mix with all the plugins and I'll turn it on and off so you can hear the difference. So that wraps up my video for mixing bass in Logic with only stock plugins. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comments, or if you have any other topics you'd like me to cover, let me know down there. Also, all of the equipment that I use to record this bass I have down in the description, so be sure to check that out. Thanks again for watching, and make sure you like and subscribe.